The federal government presented its economic update yesterday, and it projects a deficit of more than $380 billion. And that's a best-case scenario. Maria Lily Shaw is with the Montreal Economic Institute. Nice to see you again, Maria Lily.
Nice to see you too. Thank you for having me.
I guess, to be fair, any government could do nothing other than spend if they're caught in the middle of the pandemic. But from what you're seeing in what the government did yesterday, is the spending going to the right places?
I think, like you're saying, in the beginning there might not have been a lot of time to react to what was happening, so the authorities did what they thought was best. And it's undeniable that there are expenses to be made in order to enable workers and businesses to survive the crisis, especially those that we now know have been made vulnerable. And so the government did identify what they were going to do to help these now vulnerable businesses, and it's going to be through their credit availability program, which will provide low interest loans to those most affected businesses, meaning those in the hospitality and tourism sector, among others. Now, the problem with this measure is the fact that business owners have already accumulated a significant amount of debt thus far, and they may not be willing nor able to take on more loans. So while the government's intentions may be in the right place, the spending and the design of these measures might not be, because they're not fostering economic growth. Instead, they're just creating a sense of dependency.
Well, they're also set aside $100 billion for the post-pandemic economy. Are you seeing a clear plan for economic recovery there?
The short answer to that is sadly no. The plan is not clear at all. The $100 billion growth plan that you're referring to right now is a mystery. The plan was announced without providing any further details as to what the amount will be spent on, nor an exact launch date. So as we know, as of right now, is the plan will only unfold once the pandemic is under control, and that's a direct quote. And they will determine whether the pandemic is under control with what they call fiscal guardrails. And what this is just an ensemble of economic indicators such as the unemployment rate or the total number of hours worked. And it's only when these indicators reach a certain level, we don't know what level they have to reach, but when they do, it's only then that they will start to spend $100 billion over 3 years on measures that we are not yet aware of.
You know, a lot of the criticism of this document yesterday was the fact that people were saying it wasn't clear enough, it wasn't specific enough. Do you think that's why they called it an economic update as opposed to an actual budget where they might have had to be a little bit more rigorous?
The wording of the document definitely is not random. This is a very realistic possibility. The name of the document did allow them to kind of briefly go over some of the measures they plan on introducing without giving any true details as to what they're going to do concretely.
They're projecting an economic growth 1.4%, down from 1.8% pre-pandemic. Do you think that's realistic? I mean, is there a realistic plan to balance the budget?
Economic growth in the years to come all depends on the quality of the spending, the performance of the programs they recently announced. And for this to be realistic going forward, they're going to have to keep a closer eye on just how effective their programs are at encouraging productivity and economic prosperity. Right now, as for the plan to balance the budget, once again, the short answer is no, there is no clear plan. In fact, there was no mention of a fiscal anchor. Instead, they simply plan on continuing to borrow for as long as the interest rates remain low. Now, this is an approach that can easily backfire. And right now, Canada's level of borrowing is the equivalent of 20% of the country's GDP, which is among the highest in the world.
So I guess the same concerns apply to paying down the debt as well, right? Because it's really not known where the money's going to come from to do that.
Exactly. It's very hard to say right now. The only thing that's clear is that almost every revenue stream is projected to decrease. So they've announced a plan to introduce a consumption tax on digital products and services. And according to the language they use, this could include adding taxes to streaming services such as Netflix, adding a tax to products bought off Amazon that comes from a foreign vendor, or even taxing services reserved through Airbnb. So together, these new taxes are planned to raise just over $3 billion over the next 5 years. But this doesn't even come close to offset the loss in revenue that they're estimating.
So we would expect to see the next budget, a real budget, in the spring. What are you hoping to see then?
The number one thing we want to see is a clear and detailed plan of just how the government plans on balancing the books, because the finance minister talked about returning to a normal deficit. but we cannot normalize deficits. In fact, we have to prioritize balancing a budget, and for many reasons, one of which is the considerable intergenerational equity issue behind all this, because somebody someday is going to have to foot the bill. And as you mentioned earlier, the bill is now astronomical. The deficit is $381 billion. That brings our debt to $1.2 trillion, which is 50% of the country's GDP. And if anyone wants a visual representation of just how fast the government is accumulating debt, the Montreal Economic Institute will have a debt clock on its website that displays this accumulation in real time. And to give you an example, by the end of today, national debt will have increased by $41 million. So what we want to see is the government create an environment that favors growth and a stronger safety net for the next generation. And this will require a more responsible management of the budget for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for this, Maria Lily. And the Montreal Economic Institute website is iedm.org. Thanks a lot for this.
Thank you.